I was born February the 1st, 1940, at 1935, sorry, 12th Street in Philadelphia, where the Temple brought them out. And they have that's part of the campus now. And I remember that experience well. We lived there till I was around 15 or so, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe a little older. And there was nothing remarkable about that area, but there was a bar on each corner, or there was a bar on one corner, and they used to have some pretty terrible fights up there.
Did you live in an apartment building, or was it?
No, my parents bought a home, and actually in that neighborhood, I think my father was one of the most creative and innovative and hardworking men I knew, and he was one of the first, or he was, I think he was the first African-American guard of a bank, and he also had a what they call pre-owned shops. He had a 3-story pre-owned shop, and he was also working for the school board in the what department would that be? I think he was in the department where they store things. I can't think of exactly what his title was, but he had those 3 things happening at the same time, and he was doing quite well. But there was a lot of complaints about African Americans being poor during that time, not being able to get jobs and so forth and progress, so forth. But he was definitely innovative and very hardworking. My mother worked for the Navy Yard. Yeah, and she said that she was so prompt that her boss said he could check his watch by her the time that she crossed the stairway. But a lot of women worked, a lot of African American women worked at the Navy Yard during that period because it was just pretty much a little before the war and during the war. And I had an aunt who also worked for the Signal Corps for a number of years. But growing up during that period, I remember getting involved with some bad elements, and I recall my parents warning me. And I told them that I resented that because I had my own mind. I wasn't going to be influenced by other people. Next thing I know, I was in a gang. And they were absolutely right. That is something that sort of happened that you just sort of accept as being part of the environment. And you're living the environment, you're being a part of it. But that woke me up.
Do you remember the name of the gang?
No, I don't.
Oh.
That particular gang didn't have a name. It was just street guys, just hung out together because we lived in the same vicinity.
Right.
But I do recall when other members from different gangs would come through that neighborhood, there would be some violence, which is ridiculous. People call this their turf, and they don't own that street or that ground. How could it be their turf?
Was your family musical?
No, I was the first generation musician in my family, which goes way, way back to slavery, of course. But I was the first generation musician.
How'd you end up getting involved? Did you have lessons or?
No, my brother-in-law, Rashid Ali, the drummer with Coltrane for a number of years, he married my sister, and I used to go and he was a huge jazz fan and record collector. And when I used to go over their house, I used to listen to their collection, and I heard Charles Mingus. And the recording I remember most was the Clown album. And I remember saying, I would like to play bass just as a hobby. And I did indeed go out and get purchase a bass. The bass I own now was made in Germany. The wood was preserved for 50 years before they put it together. And it's called a Pullman, and it's worth $27,000. But my first bass was $125.
What year was this now?
When I started playing, well, I was in my 20s, so I'd say it had to be somewhere in the 60s, because I was born in 40.
And Rashid Ali was playing with Coltrane at that time?
Oh, no, no, no.
Before-
Yeah. When we both became interested in music, it was later during the late 50s, I would say, or the early 60s. And so it was that period of time when I purchased the instrument and when he married my sister, Gloria. And
Was
yes.
it a plywood bass that you got?
The K, yeah, it was
Yeah.
plywood. But and the one I have now is flamed maple, but I was so proud of that instrument. And the first time I plucked it, a big smile came over my face and haven't gone away since. And it was a remarkable experience, but it never occurred to me that I would play professionally. And but then I recall going through a jam session that I knew I wasn't ready to play, and I met a pianist there named John Ellis. John is still around, by the way, and he had helped a few other bass players, local bass players. And I don't know how, as a pianist, that he knew something about the bass, but he did. And he showed me quite a bit, and he was my first teacher.
Oh.
And it just went on from there.
What kind of music were you listening to as like a teenager? What kind of music did you like?
I don't recall disliking any type of music, but I remember an aunt lived with us, and their radio, they used to have all kind of stuff on their radio. Usually the stuff that was really popular, African-American music that was really popular during that period. And I used to listen, but I never heard anything that I didn't like. But I was particularly drawn to jazz through Mingus. And some years later, I recall my sister called me and told me to turn on the television that there was a young classical player on the television being conducted by Leonard Bernstein. He was playing with a youth orchestra, I think, and it was Gary Carr. And of course, everybody knows that he's the premier classical bass soloist and considered one of the best all time. And so I turned on the channel, and I was really floored about it, the technique. I just couldn't get over somebody being able to sing on an instrument like that, to get such a singing sound. And I recall getting a grant from the Pew Foundation, and the first piece, and it was to publish a music book of original compositions. And one of the pieces I wrote was dedicated to Gary Carr, and I called it Basically Carr, which is something that he uses, that's the terminology he used when he signed off on something, Basically Carr. And I titled the piece Basically Carr. And somehow, I mean, through a long line of connections, I was able to get his address, and I sent him a copy. That was years and years and years ago. And there's the CD there, and the music book that was funded through the Pew Foundation. And Gary and I stayed in touch ever since then. He sent me an extremely flattering email in appreciation of me recognizing him and dedicating a song to him. But we remained friends over the years, and we eventually he reached out to me to do a jazz recording together. And that remains, along with my gold records, as just thrilling adventures and thrilling experiences that documented for life. And in fact, I described it as I think I just called it my treasure chest of memories and great achievements.
Let me ask you, what do you think drew you to the bass rather than another instrument?
I think it was just something intuitive, because I listened by listening to all those jazz records at Rashid's house and my sister's house. I loved all those instruments, but it was something about Charles Mingus and the bass, and something about Gary Carr and the bass that just grabbed me.
Now, did you ever take formal lessons with anyone, or besides that John Ellis mentoring that you did?
John Ellis took me quite a ways,
Oh.
but not being a bassist himself. He, there were some limitations. He was a fine pianist, of course, but his limitations pretty much plateaued. And I did take a few lessons at a school called Granoff's. I don't think they're no longer in business. And I think Train went to that same school.
Yes, he did.
And McCoy,
McCoy too, I didn't know that, yeah.
and me,
Oh, did you? Really?
much later.
Yeah. So I took a few lessons there, and I think the teacher's name, I'll never forget, was John D'Amico. And I remember him telling me that John Lamb took some lessons with him. John Lamb went on to become Duke Ellington's bass player. And he said, man, I don't know. He said, why this guy came to me? I can't show him anything. And I met John, and we became good friends too. And he was outstanding. And but after studying with D'Amico, there was a huge gap of me just studying on my own and trying to learn on my own and studying through books and so forth. But then I also met the assistant first bassist with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I took Michael Shahan, and I took some lessons with him as well. And he lived in Abington, where I ended up moving for 30-some odd years. And I took a few lessons with him too. And other than that, I can't think of anybody else that I actually studied with formally.
When you were listening to the radio, was it WDAS and WHAT? Do you remember the stations? They were the two black stations mainly.
Not in those years. In fact, I never knew their call names, the actual stations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they were the local stations. You might have been listening to the national networks like, NBC or CBS or something.
Perhaps I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I just know that I heard some music and I loved it.
Ty, what was that moment when you realized, I think I'm going to be a professional bass player? This is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Well, as a result of making some of those, a few jam sessions, I thought it would be nice, and a lot of guys weren't able to make the jam sessions and really practice because they didn't own instruments. But like I said, my father was really special, and I never wanted for food or shelter or clothing or anything. And I thought that if I purchased a piano, the guys could jam at my house, and I could learn a lot from the other players that came over there, including, of course, John Ellis. And I did purchase a piano, and a lot of people came there and started jamming. So I met people through them. And the next thing I know, I got a call from a very popular tenor player at the time named Muhammad Abibullah. And he said he would like to come over and audition me to go on to Allentown with his band for a number of weeks, 6 weeks or something like that. And I said, "Do you sure you have the right number? Because I just started out. I've only been playing 6 months,
Right.
and I'm below an amateur." And I said, "I don't know how I could qualify to play with a band." He said, "Well, let me decide that." So I agreed to have the audition at my house, and he said, "You got the job." After we played a few tunes, I simply could not believe it.
So this was at your house, you would have these jam sessions?
Yeah.
What day of the week would you do that?
Almost every day.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
How'd your parents didn't mind?
it took me a long time to appreciate how generous and kind, thoughtful, and supportive my parents were, because they never at any time complained. And we used to have jam sessions with drummers and 1,000 horns and people like that over there.
What years was this? Like,
Oh, well, like I said, I started in the early 60s, so it was
Okay.
during that period.
okay.
And so, and at the time, I had gotten a job as a furniture reupholsterer with, do you remember the large company, department store, Litt Brothers?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, I was on staff at Litt Brothers as a reupholsterer. And I went to the boss, went to the manager, supervisor, and I said, "Look, I'm an amateur bassist, but I have an opportunity to go on the road with a group for 6 weeks." I said, "But I'm going to turn that down if it's going to interfere with my commitment and longevity with this job, because I need to make money to make a living." So he said, "I got a story for you." And I was amazed. He told me that his wife was a clarinet player, and she gave it up to marry him and raise a family. And he said every day of his life he could see the spark that went out of her eyes because she could no longer play. And he said, I don't want that to happen to you, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to go on the road with this band, and if you like it, fine. You haven't, and if you don't like it, you're welcome to come back. I was amazed at that opportunity,
Nice.
and doubly amazed that I could communicate with somebody that had so much, that had personal connections with that dilemma of you either staying or compromising a job and leaving. And I did. I went on the road with Muhammad Abibullah, and
How big of a band was it?
it was a quartet and a singer.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a host of singers during the period I was with him, and a host of bass players too. And I remember the mainstay pianist was Fred Simmons, and who is also still around and very active. And I remember I didn't have a very good ear, but I could play. I knew the notes on the piano, so I always kept an eye on what the piano player was doing when he was playing songs that I didn't know. And as soon as he put his hand down, I knew what the chord was, and I would accompany him. But over the years, my ear improved, and I also worked on reading a lot, because I felt that my lack of ears, I had to make up for that, with something, yeah. And so that's how that happened. And after Muhammad Abibullah, I did some local jobs. I remember Arthur Harper recommended me for a few jobs. And that was my first time playing other than with Muhammad Abibullah.
Now,
What were you playing? What was like the repertoire in that band? What was it? Jazz? Was it R&B? Was it pop music? Or?
It was jazz, but Muhammad Abibullah was more about steady work. So he did what was ever fashionable.
yeah.
Because we did some blues, we did some pop material, and I don't recall the actual repertoire, the names of the pieces, but he did everything. It was pretty much across the board, real pop and blues and so forth. And he knew. I'm sure you know that there are a lot of people with the aptitude that are brilliant artistically, but don't have a good business sense, or it's the other way around. You know, he had a tremendous business sense. But wasn't on the same level as an artist, as a saxophonist. And because of that business sense, he kept us working. I remember driving to jobs in storms with him, that people would even book him, in the middle of a storm and thunderstorms and stuff, but he kept the band working.
How much did you get paid for like a week with the band back then?
That's funny, I don't remember.
Really?
I really don't remember how much we made then. But I do remember getting a job as the house bassist at Pep's Show Bar, which used to be at Broad in South. And I remember backing up Lou Rawls there. And that was the first salary I remember. It was $275 a week. And we were also received a per diem. If we worked or not, we would get that pay. And that's the first job I actually remember getting, I recall the salary for,
I assume you had to become a member of the union, 274?
A few years after that, but I've been a member for moons and moons. But not during that period particularly.
Ty, where did you go to elementary school and high school?
Elementary school was Paul Lawrence Dunbar. My junior high was started Flasher, and high school was Ben Franklin.
Okay.
They were all around the same area. Oh, well, no, not the elementary school was closer to where I lived, but where I started Flasher.
Did you do any musical things at school?
Oh, no, my school did. See, I started when I was in my 20s, so I was out of school then.
Yeah.
And I didn't get into music till I connected with my brother-in-law.
So you weren't in any school bands or?
I wasn't playing then. I didn't have a clue about an instrument.